Welcome to Interludes with Chris Mackenzie. And here we are back at Interludes, and once again, Bud Tingwell is with us in the studio. He's been very good to come toddling in again. Been really appreciated, Bud. Thank you. Welcome back. Now, we've got lots more to talk about.
I guess so, yeah. I can't remember where we got up to. I don't know where I was born in Coogee.
Well, the Desert Rats, actually.
Oh, the Desert Rats, yes.
yes.
Look, that was a lovely experience because I got to know Richard Burton pretty well. He was a beaut bloke. When people said, "What's he like?" I said, "Well, he's good enough to be a Sydney radio actor." Because he was a Cardiff radio actor. And then I discovered he was actually in the Air Force and became a Mosquito aircraft navigator, and I was a Mosquito aircraft pilot. He didn't get on opposite. He was a bit younger than I, and his squadron the war ended before his squadron went into action. But apparently I think he'd been in the Oxford University Air Squadron, as I think Warren Mitchell, who was a great mate of his at the time. Yeah. Warren was also in it. But no, he was beaut and very much the new star in Hollywood. I mean, in that everybody was telling him he was the new star. He just played the lead in a film with Olivia de Havilland called... what was it called? But anyway, whatever it was called, it was the big new movie. And the next one was The Desert Rats, and the one after that was The Robe. So he was away and running.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And he was then married to Sybil Williams. She was a Welsh actress and lovely woman. And But he took me around, introduced me to all sorts of people, socially at various times. It was good. And I just found him to be a very down-to-earth bloke. Yes, we enjoyed a beer after work, but that's all. People said, he must have done. I said, no, I never saw him drunk or anything. He used to have a beer after work like most people do.
Yeah. And then you came back here?
Yes. Chips Rafferty and I had these plans, really his plans, and he actually had a production company. He'd made one film the year before called Phantom Stockman for very little money. He very courageously waited for a print to be sent to him in Hollywood, and then he took it around the world under his arm. Little outback story with a very famous guy in his day, Bob Tadawalli, or as Ernie Dingo says, Tudawali. I said, all right, I knew him as Bob Tadawalli. He was a tribal man who became quite a movie star for quite a while back in those years, early 50s. And Chips took the film around the world and sold it individually to various countries and things, and the film was sort of in profit by the time he got back. So he had the money to start, and investors to start making King of the Coral Sea, which we did after we got back from Hollywood, and that was great. That was terrific buzz because we went up to Thursday Island, and
that's when you had your first, second honeymoon, wasn't it?
That's right. Yes, because I once wrote an angry letter to Chip saying, I think you've mucked up what was a great story, because we used to discuss it around the swimming pool at the hotel in Hollywood, and I loved the simplicity of the idea of the old methods of pearl shell diving, and I, as the absentee owner of the company living in luxury in Sydney, who had a bit of an underwater track record in the services during World War II, I wanted to modernise and bring in aqualungs and things, and that was the simple story. They complicated it a bit by having it also to do with illegal immigration, which I suppose makes it very relevant again. But I thought they'd complicated it too much, wrote a stern letter to Chips, and he rang up and said, got your letter this morning. I thought, here it comes, And he said, no, I want to discuss it. We want to buy it from you. I said, what do you mean buy it? It's your story. I've just sort of got you back, I think, on the track. Never mind, come on in. We discussed it, and that's how I got all my wife's expenses. That was my payment. That was great.
Listen, yeah. When you'd been married, you said 2 or 3 years by that time.
Yeah, 1951.
You're married in Sydney?
Yes. Oh, yes. Poor Audrey, my late wife, she loved the idea of flying, wanted to join the Air Force. We discovered her mother had actually been in the Royal Air Force in World War I. I didn't know there were women in the Royal Air Force in World War I, but there she was, yes. But she wouldn't let Audrey join the Air Force. She was too young. So when Audrey could, she got into Trans-Australia Airlines, TAA as it was then, as an air hostess, which was the correct term in those days.
Yes.
None of her cabin attendants and things. But and Audrey loved it, and she was flying for about 9 months or so when I was offered a flat, and all we were doing was waiting to find a flat so we could get married.
Right.
and in those days, didn't think of doing it anyhow. We had to get the flat, and a film mate of mine offered us our flat when they found a house, and it was a tiny flat in Killara. I rang Audrey, who was then based in Melbourne. I was up in Sydney. I said, "Darling, we can get married. We've got a flat." And I remember her saying, "Oh, good," because she loved flying. Because the moment she just told them she was getting married, she had to resign. You weren't allowed to fly and be married in those days under the rules, not just the fashion. It was the rules of many companies. So she wasn't allowed to continue flying, and I've got her logbook at home, and just we were married on July the 19th, 1951. About July the 15th, it's got a little thing saying, "Resigned," alongside the entry of her last flight. But she loved it. So we got married in 1951.
Right, yeah. And obviously lived in Sydney.
Yep.
Not always, though.
No, because I had to go to England in '56 to finish a movie, and we accidentally stayed there for many years.
What did you go to England for?
It was a film called The Shirley that Peter Finch came out to do, and I had a smallish part, nice little part, of the truck driver who gives them a lift at one stage and then gets involved in some adventures in the next town. And the studio, Ealing Studios, asked me if I'd mind going to London to do the studio scenes, and that had saved them building a set in Sydney. So my wife and I said, "Yeah, okay, we'll go over there for an appropriate number of weeks." It was just about the time television was due to start in Australia, and we'll go over like everybody else and say we are studying television as well as working over here. And just before we finished the film, I actually did the narration for the movie as well. And just before going home, somebody said, "Look, you might as well meet this guy. He's the casting man for Associated Television," which was Lou Grade's company, and one of the new commercial stations over there, commercial channels, and or the commercial channel. It was only one, and I was cast as the Australian surgeon in a planned sort of a 3 or 4 week run of a television serial called Emergency Ward 10, and it was live to air in those days, no recording process of any kind, and the first episode went to air in February '57, and the next day we were a huge hit. They did a survey a couple of weeks later and found there was something like 27 million viewers per episode.
Good grief.
So the poor producers were going mad trying to rewrite all the background stories. Have we said he's married? No, that's good. Right, he's not married now. So, and my guy started off having a sick wife somewhere and finished up by the second week. I had a sick sister in the Isle of Wight whom nobody ever met, but it kept me free for romantic stories and things. I'm one of the leads of this thing. And I did about 6 years in the show with Australia House in London saying, stay in it as long as you can. It's a whole new image. No stock whips, no horses. And I became a consultant surgeon. And so there was a good image for Australia, and it got me many movies. The television company treated me brilliantly. They used to give me leave to do films and write me back into the show when I wanted to come back in. It was utopian. It was fantastic.
Wonderful.
We weren't paid a fortune, but that was better than money to have that sort of freedom and exposure.
Wonderful, absolutely.
And great experience, wonderful experience.
Now we want to listen to a lady singing.
Oh, who have we got?
Jean Hatton.
Oh, my first movie was Come Up Smiling, starring Jean Hatton. Admittedly, I was a schoolboy extra and not paid, but I'm actually in that film, and she played the lead with Will Mahoney, Evie Hayes, and all sorts of lovely people, with Alec Kellaway being the villain. I think he was the boxer.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, here we go. Hatton, who was apparently known as the Australian Deanna Durbin.
Well, Australia's Deanna
Oh,
Durbin was
possessive.
apostrophe. No, what happened was there was a competition to find out the girl who could sing most like Deanna Durbin. When Deanna Durbin became very famous in those amazing days when she and Judy Garland were starting out. And Jean Hatton won. And she was good, pretty girl and good little actress. So she did Come Up Smiling and quite a lot of other movies too.
And she sang, that was the name of that one, was That Certain Age.
Yes,
Yes, we know about that, don't we?
Yeah.
That Certain Age.
Yeah.
So you were in England and you were doing Emergency Ward 10
Yeah.
and having a ball. What about Miss Marple?
Well, 1961, I was rung up by George Pollock, the director, and said, "Can you get time out of your medical series?" I said, "Yes, we're going to do a film based on the 450 from Paddington by Agatha Christie with Miss Marple, and we've got Margaret Rutherford." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I asked Tony Carey, our producer. He said, "Sure, mate. Yeah, when do you want to start?" In a couple of weeks, 3 weeks' time or something. He said, "Okay." So they rewrote the storyline. Said I'd gone to another hospital for a while, and or was I downstairs operating? But anyway, I was away for about 4 or 5 weeks doing this wonderful movie. And we finished it. It was just a straight up and down film. Lovely cast. James Robertson Justice. Wonderful American actor called Arthur Kennedy, who was from New York. Became very famous in Lawrence of Arabia as the white-suited, American journalist in that. A lovely man. And I just had a ball. And George Pollock was a lovely director and a great crew. And I was very good. I didn't watch the rushes because if I ever saw myself, I hated myself for the rest of that day and probably days after. So I didn't. But I used to sit outside the rushes studio, and people would come out and say, "Oh, you should have seen it. They were all great." So there's a lovely feeling built up. And Margaret was so wonderful to work with.
Yes, tell us about her.
Oh, she was great. She was a very intelligent woman, highly intelligent woman. She was an English teacher by profession, became a professional actor, I think, in her 40s. I think she'd done a lot of amateur work. Was made dame, whatever the term is, elevated, whatever. I'm sure not just for her acting, but we discovered that one of her secrets was she used to do very good work for prisoners all over England, and particularly young offenders. She'd get any musical abilities in the young offenders' homes, put them into groups, and then go around being an unpaid agent, getting them gigs. And one of the end-of-production parties she organised, and the most enthusiastic group of bad musicians I've ever seen, teenagers, came on and they provided the music. And they had a ball. And that's how we found out this great secret of Margaret's. Wonderful, wonderul woman. And her husband, Stringer Davis, played the librarian in all of them. And she died, after two or 3 years, I think, after we did the fourth. We were to have done the fifth, but MGM decided to change policy and only make big movies. Years later, I heard it was one of the problems with those Miss Marple films, was they were successful. And she became Margaret became the top female box office star in the United States after the second one. They used to fly to Cape Canaveral to farewell astronauts. She beat Elizabeth Taylor one year at the top of them. And so, which means the films are highly profitable. I heard later from an accountant, the brother of an MGM accountant, that in fact it was mucking up a rather subtle tax situation they had in England for MGM. So that was one of the reasons they had to stop making them, because they were too successful. And I thought, that's interesting. We didn't know that. No. But whether it was true or not, I don't know. But I love the explanation.
We only want to make expensive movies.
Are
they popular? Well, that doesn't matter.
But they were great, and and most of us worked on each one, and I sometimes had a different sergeant, but I loved being invited to do them. They were just
wonderful.
Terrific.
Now we've got another bit of music from The Breaker.
Oh. Crikey.
Yes, John Williamson and yourself.
Yes, well, The Breaker, that was a very important Aussie movie.
Wasn't it?
Breaker Morant.
Yep.
And Bruce Beresford directed and asked me if I'd play the beastly chap in charge of the court marshal, what was he, president of the court, and Harry Hobbold, Morant, etc. And John Williamson asked me if I'd mind narrating this song that he'd written about The Breaker, which I hope we'll hear in a moment.
Right.
Harry Harbord Morant. Is that your name? Well-educated gentleman. That's what you claim.
Well, there wasn't a bet that he wouldn't take. He had a neck that you couldn't break. Bay or Brumby couldn't shake the breaker. He married a girl from Mockford Sand, stole a pig and away he ran. Troubadour and mystery man, the breaker.
They say you're a poet, a great horseman. Sailed your horse over a 7-foot fence by candlelight? What a show!
There wasn't a bet that he wouldn't take. He had a neck that you couldn't break. Bay or Brumby couldn't shake the breaker. He married a girl from Mockford Sand, stole a pig and away he ran. Troubadour and mystery man, the breaker.
Couldn't pay your debts. Wouldn't pay your debts. Joined the Bushveld Carbineers. Showed qualities of leadership.
He fought the unpoetic law. He ran away to the Boer War, killing he'd never seen before, the breaker. He wasn't a man to nurture hate till he came upon his butchered mate, and his anger twisted his own fate, the breaker.
You executed a prisoner without a fair trial. You were under orders. Lord Kitchener denies such a command. Harry Harbord Morant. This court finds you guilty of murder. You will be shot at dawn.
There wasn't a bet that he wouldn't take. He had a neck that you couldn't break. Bay or Brumby couldn't shake the breaker. He married a girl from Mockford Sand, stole a pig and away he ran. Troubadour and mystery man, the breaker. There wasn't a bet that he wouldn't take. He had a neck that you couldn't break. Bay or Brumby couldn't shake the breaker. He married a girl from Mockford Sand, stole a pig and away he ran. Troubadour and mystery man, the breaker. Wasn't a bet that he wouldn't take. He had a neck that you couldn't break. Bay or Brumby couldn't shake the breaker. Married a girl from Mockford Sand, stole a pig and away he ran.
Yes, The Breaker with John Williamson and Bud himself doing the commentary. Tell us about The Breaker.
Oh, it was a fabulous film to do. It was a great script. I'd made a couple of movies with Bruce Beresford, the director, before then, and I just loved the way he shot it. We rehearsed a lot. We had some fine actors. Edward Woodward and I had worked together in England. In fact, he'd been in Emergency Ward 10 with me. First of all as a nutty patient, and a couple of years later he came back as the chest surgeon, and then the producer asked me to take over as the chest surgeon because Teddy got an offer to go to Stratford-on-Avon to play one of the leads down there in a new season, and he's a beaut bloke, Edward Woodward. I can't tell you what he describes his name sounding like. Edward Woodward. It sounds like something in a bottle, but I best not say. However, Jack Thompson I thought was superb in that. Jack's big speech, was take one, and he did it in one go. Bruce placed us all in exactly the right positions round behind the camera. And that big speech, one of the finest bits of film acting I've ever seen from Jack. And just every bit of it was a great pleasure. I don't think I ever left the set. I used to sit there no matter what angle they were shooting just to watch it all happen. It was a terrific experience. And I'm not sure that, I mean, the actual story of Breakham Rant is controversial because there'll be people taking both sides, the other side, and the boys didn't behave all that well, and so and so and so and so. Should they have been shot? No, but that was the regulation in those days, all that sort of thing. But the work on that film was really stunning. And,
where was it shot mainly?
South Australia, a little place called Burra, I think it is, up in the country.
Yeah.
And I loved the way they arrived at the location. They did a big location survey and they said, we found the perfect place. It doesn't look anything like Australia. Bare hills, denuded, trees had been taken away back in, was it the copper mining days, or for pit props and things like that, and these bare brown hills. By the time we started to shoot, they'd had lots of rain, so they were bare green hills, but they still didn't look like Australia. They sort of looked like lush Africa somewhere. So they said, well, we're winning either way, and it was a wonderful location. The bandstand that they used occasionally, I think that was in the town of Burra, just as it is. They may have repainted it, or I don't know, but it was a great shoot. And they built the studio, that courtroom, as a four-walled set. And with doors just slightly wider so the cameras could get in and out. So you really walked into a room inside a studio feeling like you were in the real place. It was terrific. It was really great.
Made it much easier for you. It was a movie. I unfortunately haven't seen it, but they'll bring it back, won't they?
Oh yes, it's kicking around.
Kicking around.
Yes. We've got a new print of it at Screen Sound. When I say we, I do a bit of work with the Film and Sound Archives, now called Screen Sound. And I've seen some of the new print, and it's absolutely beautiful, really. Because Don McAlpin was the director of photography. Gary Wilkins was a wonderful sound man. Oh, look, the multiplication of skills on that movie were terrific.
And what year was that?
Oh, I would say it must be just over 20 years ago now. Probably 1980, 81, sometime like that.
And so, we'll just have a quick ask before we have to finish. What did you do after that? Can you remember?
Oh, crikey. A bit of this and a bit of that, a few movies, and a lot of directing at Crawford's and a lot of producing. I produced shows. I like the Flying Doctors mini-series, which was like producing a great big lush movie. I loved doing that, and that was a huge success. And then about a year later they made an ongoing series. I was tied up with an old mate of mine, Morris West, in Sydney on a production, and I couldn't be the producer, but I was a consultant producer while they got it ready and got the storylines going of the ongoing thing. But it ran for quite a long time, I think 2 or 3 years, that series. I think I guessed it in it as an actor at one stage, but Oscar Woodbred produced the ongoing series.
I'm going to ask you if you would come back and talk some more, because we've just sort of scratched the surface, because we're now into another whole section of your life at this particular time. And would you, at another point, come back and do some more?
If you can stand it, yes.
We can stand it. We can stand it. So, Bud Tingwell, we'll hope to see you again soon.
Thank
you for coming in.
Thanks very much.
You've been listening to Interludes.